Hi, folks. Brian Rushing, the voice of the South Point Red Raiders. Friday night, the South Point Red Raiders traveled to Sylva, North Carolina to take on the Smoky Mountain Mustangs in the first round of the 2AA Western Regional. It was a matchup pitting up the 13-seed South Point Red Raiders against the 4-seed Smoky Mountain Mustangs. And these are some of the sights and sounds from Friday night's action. South Point Red Raiders coming out to the field in their all-whites this evening. Some of the notables at the ball game on the sidelines and in the stands as the South Point Red Raiders captains would make their way out to the field for this first round 2AA Western Regional matchup against a Smoky Mountain club that came in 8-3 on the season. As you can see, the Red Raiders coming out through the banner on what ended up being a very chilly and blustery evening in the mountains of North Carolina, as this South Point Red Raiders club wanted to make a statement in this game. Knowing that the regular season wasn't necessarily what they were expecting to happen, they knew that they were given a new lease on life with this first round playoff matchup. In the early going, Smoky Mountain had an empty series. As you can see here early on, the South Point defense doing a phenomenal job against the two main running backs of the Smoky Mountain Mustangs, forcing a punt scenario that'll be coming up in just a moment. As you've got Stevens and Frady on the side for Smoky Mountain High School, their first drive, very unproductive. They were forced to punt, and that punt would successfully roll down to the 1-yard line, putting South Point in the shadow of their own end zone. Opening drive for the South Point Red Raiders ended up with no scoring, and that's exactly where we would have a 6-0 lead come about from Smoky Mountain as Stevens would find the back of the end zone. The next drive for the South Point Red Raiders, they would try to get on the board, and they would take a little bit of time in doing so as they would march down the field. As you see there, Will Reinhardt finding Ray Rose on the near side with the pass play. They would run down the remainder of the first quarter clock. Here in this first quarter, they would be down 6-0, but it would be a good sign of things to come as they would get into the red zone before the start of the second quarter. As you can see, the pitch here to Hunter Hogue on the near side. Hunter Hogue scampering for about a 17-yard gain, which would be another first down for South Point. We would be through one quarter. Smoky Mountain would have the 6-0 advantage, but it took absolutely one play for Naseem Jones to find the end zone from a yard out. He plunges it through, and the South Point Red Raiders take a 7-6 lead. After a Smoky Mountain punt would give the ball back to the South Point Red Raiders, South Point would try to move the ball down the field, and things did not look extraordinarily good in the early going of this drive until they were able to finally break through. The passing game, 6 of 8 on the night for 91 yards total and a touchdown reception, but it would be Devin King on this particular drive who would make up the difference in this contest, as he would have 48 yards to pay dirt, moving the ball in from virtually midfield, getting a couple of good blocks on the way to pay dirt. He keeps his feet upright, and he gets into the end zone, and the South Point Red Raiders have a 14-6 lead against the men from Sylva, North Carolina. As you can see, the sideline excited about their prospects as they have the 14-6 lead. That lead would be somewhat short-lived, as Smoky Mountain would continue to make a move downfield as they would get the offense going, as they would get Stevens and Frady working simultaneously. Stevens, a very elusive back for Smoky Mountain, has a very similar makeup to that of a Christian McCaffrey. The young man at the high school level had over 170 yards rushing on the evening. The fumble for South Point would give the ball back in a short field to the Smoky Mountain Mustangs, and that's where Stevens would eventually go in with a 9-yard touchdown plunge to make it a 14-12 ball game. This will be the scoring play that you see here, where Stevens gets the ball on the interior handoff from the shotgun snap, and he would take it into the end zone from that 9 yards out. The point after touchdown on the very next play would end up being deflected off the right upright. However, there was a flag on the play for the South Point Red Raiders, giving Smoky Mountain an opportunity to go for 2 now from the yard line. 1 yard out, Frady with the plunge makes it 14-14, and all of a sudden we're deadlocked late in the second quarter. The South Point Red Raiders would waste little time. After a chop block call, Ray Rose would take it to the house from 73 yards out. He gets to the 40, to the 30. A Rose by any other name would not smell as sweet as he gets to the end zone. And the South Point Red Raiders, with the Carson Smith point after touchdown, would take the lead to the locker room, 21-14, much to the delight of the South Point sideline. Final drive for the Smoky Mountain Mustangs as South Point would punt it downfield. A good punt from Dylan Nix would be spotted down at around the 20-yard line. 80 yards to go for Smoky Mountain on that final drive. They would move it downfield as Frady and Stevens worked together to put themselves in position, but it was all for naught. They would advance the ball only to midfield, where there'd be a last-ditch effort from the quarterback, Lomenick, to throw the ball to the end zone before time would run out, and the South Point Red Raiders would go to the locker room leading 21-14, as you can see here, the final play of the first half. So the South Point Red Raiders, coming out of the locker room leading 21-14, would waste little time as Devin King would take the kickoff down to the 20-yard line, and he would be called upon again to carry the ball to the near side. As you see, he gets across the line to gain and into the red zone for the South Point Red Raiders, where they would be poised to find the end zone once again and take a 2-touchdown lead. You can see from this vantage point right on the goal line that Nassim Jones is going to take the inside handoff and go over right guard and find pay dirt for the South Point Red Raiders to take a 28-14 lead, as there's no place like the red zone for the South Point Red Raiders. Nassim Jones had 2 touchdowns in the contest, as he would rush also for over 50 yards in the ballgame. This is a South Point club that owned the ground game this evening, and they would continue to press that number forward. As you can see, Devin King working to the outside, as South Point would continue to put themselves in position to take what ultimately would be a 3-touchdown advantage. How would they do so? Well, they would call on one of their stars, Ray Rose. Ray Rose had a phenomenal game rushing the football, as he had 75 yards rushing on Friday night. He would also receive the ball 88 yards passing to go with a touchdown. The play coming up is the Ray Rose touchdown catch that he caught from a slot on the near side to pay dirt from 28 yards out. This was a South Point Red Raiders club desperately looking to overcome some of the foibles that they had faced in the regular season. Reinhardt puts Hogan in motion, but throws it downfield to the right hash. Ray Rose catches it at the goal line, and just like that, South Point, with 8 minutes remaining in the third quarter, has a 35-14 lead in the first round of the 2A Western Regional against the 4-seed Smoky Mountain High School. Smoky Mountain would go on a prolonged drive. Late into the third quarter, they would ultimately find the end zone, but they had taken almost the entire 8 minutes off the third quarter clock to make the score 35-21 in favor of South Point. You can see the sideline there, Phil Tate trying to rustle up his troops in this fourth quarter with the hopes of getting into the second round of the playoffs. As you can see, the score 35-21, a blocked punt by Smoky Mountain High School would trim the lead to 35-28 as it was recovered in the end zone. And South Point now all of a sudden found themselves just 1 touchdown ahead. Devin King would take the direct snap as the quarterback. He would have the sledding hard on the far side, but then they would go to Rose again. Rose would get a couple catches on this drive to continue to move the chains, as he would make the second catch here in just a moment on the next play, going one-on-one against Stevens in traffic, as Reinhardt gave him the quick look-in pass, and he would move the ball ahead to pass the line to gain to continue the South Point Red Raiders drive. The clock would continue to roll. South Point continue to have the advantage inside 7 minutes remaining in the ball game. Ball at the 5-yard line, a goal line situation for the Red Raiders, and they call on Devin King. You see him in motion. He'll try to race to the pylon. Smoky Mountain trying to chase it. Won't matter. He gets into the pylon. Touchdown, South Point Red Raiders. They have a 42-28 lead. Would that be enough for the South Point Red Raiders to advance to the 2A Western Regional? You see the guys on the sideline trying to prime this club for the final 5 minutes plus of the ball game, not knowing what was taking place at the same time in Ashe County. Smoky Mountain High School would continue to go on a drive, and because they're down 2 touchdowns in this scenario, they would have to start going to the air. And that is where South Point had an opportunity to take advantage, as they felt their team speed would win the day for them. Smoky Mountain would continue to work the ball to Stevens. Stevens would continue to prove elusive throughout the course of the ball game. This is a young man that had over 200 yards from the line of scrimmage in the contest. Eventually, it would be Will Frady that takes the handoff to the far side. He gets into the end zone. The point after touchdown is good. And with just mere minutes remaining in the contest, South Point would cling to a 42-35 lead. Smoky Mountain having to kick an onside kick. It would be fielded by Matt Hastings, and Matt Hastings would fall on it and give the South Point Red Raiders an opportunity to hold on to the football and run the clock out. However, Smoky Mountain had different ideas. South Point stymied with a 3-and-out. They would try to go for it on 4th down, as you see Smoky Mountain being very stingy. Will Reinhardt's pass into the flat intended for Ray Rose would fall incomplete, and Smoky Mountain would have one final opportunity to level this ball game and send it into overtime. As you can see, the moment's tense for Nassim Jones and the South Point Red Raiders. The final drive for Smoky Mountain would be all for naught, as Frady would have the yards to gain for 1st down, but he would fumble it, and Ben Lunsford would come away with the fumble recovery, and that would send the South Point Red Raiders into the victory formation, as they would win the first round 2A Western Regional game against Smoky Mountain 42-35. What they did not know is at the same time, it would be West Lincoln that would dispatch Ashe County in a 5 versus 12 matchup, winning 48-6. Because of that, the South Point Red Raiders will now travel to Vail, North Carolina for the 2nd round playoffs, as it's 13 versus 12, Red Raiders versus the West Lincoln Rebels. We hope that you'll join us Friday night at 7:30 in Vail for the matchup. This is what Coach Adam Hodge had to say at the conclusion of the matchup.
I'm proud of you. I'm happy as I can be. It's going to be a fun ride home, and I'm excited. Boy, it makes them weekends a lot better. Proud of you. Listen, I told you before the game it was going to be a fist fight, and it was, but we won it, right?
Hold them up.
Listen, we got another next week, and I can't wait, because there ain't nothing like winning, baby.